The Senate will come to order. The Secretary will call the roll.
Senator Buck. Here. Senator Cannizzaro. Here. Senator Daley. Here. Senator Doñate. Here. Senator Dondaraloop. Senator Flores. Present. Senator Goycochea. Senator Hammond. Here. Senator Hansen. Here. Senator Harris. Here. Senator Krasner. Here. Senator Lang. Here. Senator Neal. Here. Senator Wynn. Here. Senator Orenshaw. Here. Senator Pizzina. Present. Senator Scheibel. Here. Senator Seaver-Scansert. Here. Senator Spearman. Here. Senator Stone. Senator Titus.
Thank you. Let the record reflect there are 21 senators present. Please rise for the prayer by Pastor Randy Roser of the Bridge Church in Carson City and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good afternoon. Let's pray. Well, Lord, I pray that every day we bring you our praise and thanksgiving for our many blessings, that you walk us through our day, especially our Lieutenant Governor and the senators here today. Truly, you're a great God. We know you've sent your Spirit to work in and through this exceptional group of senators who serve to protect and lead the citizens of Nevada. So guide their thoughts, their values, their morals this day. I'm sure they face difficult situations while trying to bring glory to your name. So, Lord, all glory to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order of Business 3, reading and approval of the journal. By previous order of the Senate, the reading of the journal is dispensed with, and the President and Secretary are authorized to make the necessary corrections and additions. Order of Business 16, remarks from the floor, introduction of guests. Who would like to go first? Oh, there he goes, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my honor to introduce our Touro staff. If all Touro faculty and students could please stand to be recognized. Touro University is home of Nevada's largest medical school, as well as graduate degree programs in physician assistant studies, occupational therapy, physical therapy, nursing, medical health sciences, and education. And this year, Touro is celebrating 19 years of operation in Nevada. As Touro continues to pave the way for innovative education, it is seeing record admission applications for its competitive programs and 100% placement of Touro students in postgraduate residency programs. Touro is providing Nevada with a team-based, community-focused education that will serve the citizens of the state of Nevada now and well into the future. And I'm also an adjunct faculty member of Touro in its doctoral studies in education. So please join me in welcoming, making them all feel welcome today. Thank you.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I have with me my intern, Idalis Figueroa. She was born and raised in Las Vegas, but in a small lapse of judgment, attended undergrad at UNR, and is now graduating this May from the University of North Dakota with her law degree. In her free time, she enjoys reading, traveling, and spending time with her family and puppy Maddox. If you all could please join me in making her feel welcome.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Go Pack. I am actually here to introduce you to a number of people who are here for lobby days with the Nevada State AFL-CIO. So if you're here with Nevada State AFL-CIO on the floor in the gallery, if you could please stand so that we can recognize you. Yeah. So as you can see, we have quite a few folks here from the many organizations that fall under the umbrella of the Nevada State AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO is the state federation of labor representing over 150,000 members of more than 120 unions across and throughout Nevada. Their members come from the building and construction trades, service trades, public employee sectors, and many more. And as Nevada's voice at work, they strive to ensure that all working people are treated fairly with decent paychecks and benefits, safe jobs, dignity, and equal opportunities. I am super pleased to have everyone from the AFL-CIO here. I come from a labor union family. My parents were culinary Local 226 members growing up, so it's always special to have these folks here with us today. I also have, and I want to recognize, former Assemblywoman, now Executive Secretary Treasurer. I don't want to call her president, but we'll give her a promotion some other time. But former Assemblywoman Susie Martinez, who is a native Nevadan, she's with me on the floor today as well, who leads the AFL here in Nevada. She focuses her attention on the labor movement, and here's another first for you. As the first woman and first Latina to be elected to lead the Nevada State AFL-CIO, she is also the only person in history to have served as an elected official and the head of the Nevada AFL-CIO. And so we're very excited to have her here and always love having the first woman to do things in this building, as we are known for. So if you would all please join me in making all of these hardworking folks feel very welcome here in the Senate, I would appreciate it.
Senator Krasner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I'm so happy to welcome students from Bishop Manogue High School. I believe they're up in the gallery, so please stand up if you're with Bishop Manogue High School. I'm also fortunate to have with me Matt Shambari, who is the president of Bishop Manogue High School. So please welcome them. Thank you.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today is Make the Road Youth Lobby Day in the building. There's about 100 plus kids running around, students running around the building. So just please make sure you give them some time. There is nothing more important than we have actual students in this building, that they feel empowered to demand that we represent them. Joining me from them, we have Eric, if you could please stand, and Raymond. Who are not only here for the Youth Lobby Day, but they're also family to my great attaché, Zach. So if they're his family, they are now considered family to me as well. So if you could give them a quick round of applause. I also wanted to do a quick shout out from one of my schools, Matter Academy. We have Dr. Patrick Carter, Axel Perez Rios, and Francisco Ramirez Jimenez, who are visiting the building today. And I believe they might be somewhere in the gallery. If you could give them a quick round of applause. And lastly but not least, I must point out that today is also the unofficial KFC day in the building. My colleague from the north, from Senate District 14, and now, and by the way, I need everybody to know this. He is the unofficial rural spokesperson for KFC, and I am the unofficial Latino spokesperson for KFC. And now we have our newest member from Senate District 17, who is now the official rural woman spokesperson for KFC. So if you all would like to join in the tradition, we've been doing this for years now, more than 6 years. Please make sure that next session you wear your three-piece. Thank you.
All right, seeing no other remarks, we will take a quick recess to allow our guests to exit the floor over here to my left. Good. The Senate is back in order. We are on order of business 4, reports of committees.
Mr. President, your Committee on Commerce and Labor, to which was referred Senate Bill number 402, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Pat Spearman, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, to which were referred Senate Bills numbers 257, 338, 424, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Dallas Harris, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Judiciary, to which were referred Senate Bills numbers 222, 289, 296, 389, and 418, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Melanie Scheibel, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, to which were referred Senate Bills numbers 54 and 133, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator James Orenshaw, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill number 159, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Julie Pizzina, Chair. End of reports.
Thank you. Order of business 8, waivers and exemptions.
Notice of exemption, April 19th, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Rule 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Senate Bills numbers 54, 107, 139, 222, and 389. Signed, Wayne Thorley, Fiscal Analysis Division. End of notice.
Order of business 9, Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bills numbers 25, 26, 171, 180, 251, 258, and 269 be taken from their positions on general file today and placed on general file for the next legislative day.
Very good. You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bills numbers 174 and 261 be taken from their positions on general file and placed on the Secretary's desk for purposes of amendment and further discussion.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bills 107 and 139 be taken from their position on general file and be referred to the Committee on Finance.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
That concludes Order of Business 9.
Okay, we are on Order of Business 12, second reading.
Senate Bill 21, introduced by Government Affairs, revises certain classifications based on populations. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 455, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
And who would like to speak to this? Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of amendment number 455.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of amendment number 455 to Senate Bill 21.
You've heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Mr. President, Amendment 455 revises subsection 1 and 2 of the Nevada Revised Statutes 387.331 to increase the population threshold from 55,000 to 100,000 to allow a county lion to continue collecting the residential construction tax on behalf of the school district.
Are there any further remarks on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 21, as amended, is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 24, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to the Office of Small Business Advocacy within the Office of the Lieutenant Governor. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 456 proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of amendment number 456.
Very good. You've heard any objections? So ordered. Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of amendment number 456 to Senate Bill 24.
Senator Flores.
Amendment 456 extends the prospective expiration of the Office of Small Business Advocacy in the Office of the Lieutenant Governor from July 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2025.
You've heard the motion. Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 24 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 83, introduced by Senator Daley, revises provisions governing the confidentiality of the personal information of certain civilian employees of law enforcement agencies. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 83 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 94, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to tribal liaison officers. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 94 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 184, introduced by Senators Spearman and Flores, revises the charter of the City of North Las Vegas. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 460, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Okay, I have Senator Spearman. Did you want to speak, or is this Senator Flores? Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of amendment number 460.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of amendment 460 to Senate Bill 184.
Heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Amendment 460 deletes Section 5 related to residency requirements for certain city officers.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 184 is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 194, introduced by Senators Orangel, Flores, Krasner, and Lang, revises provisions relating to step therapy protocols. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 240, proposed by the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move that the Senate adopt Amendment 240 to Senate Bill 194.
You've heard the motion. Senator Spearman.
Amendment 240 to Senate Bill 194 does the following. Extends the response time for health insurers to reply to the request or appeals from 72 hours to 2 business days. Clarifies the insurer's authority in determining justification based on submitted documentation and explicitly excludes the Public Employees Benefits Program from the bill's provisions.
Thank you. Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 194 is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 225, introduced by Senator Harris, revises provisions governing peace officers. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 462, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of amendment 462.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of amendment number 462 to Senate Bill 225.
You've heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Amendment 462 requires an applicant to attest that they have not been discharged for conduct that would result in the revocation of a certificate of peace officer under regulations adopted by the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, requires a law enforcement agency to notify the commission if a peace officer resigns from employment while an investigation concerning alleged misconduct is pending, clarifies the attestation regarding the use of cannabis before and after submission of an application for employment and screening for the use of cannabis as a condition of employment or continued employment, and revises the effective date.
Thank you. Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 225 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 247, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions relating to regional planning. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 247 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 259, introduced by Senators Dondero, Loop, Canizaro, Doñate, Harris, Wynn, and Pazina, revises provisions relating to alcoholic beverages. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 241, proposed by the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
If there are no objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move that the Senate adopt Amendment 241 to Senate Bill 259.
You've heard the motion, Senator Spearman.
Amendment 241 to the Senate Bill 259 does the following. Retains language limiting wine sales at a secondary location to 50% of the winery's total sales. Authorizes the State Board of Agriculture to create certification for wine made with locally grown fruit or honey based on the winery's federal alcohol and tobacco tax and Trade Bureau filings.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 259 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 262, introduced by Senators Flores, et cetera, and Assemblywoman Gonzalez, et cetera, revises the qualifications for membership on certain advisory councils and boards. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 262 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 271, introduced by Senator Neal, revises provisions relating to discrimination. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 271 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 272, introduced by Senators Spearman, et cetera, revises provisions relating to governmental administration. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 272 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 275, introduced by Senator Daley, revises provisions relating to manufactured home parks. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 101, proposed by the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
If there are no objections, so ordered.
Mr. President, I move the Senate adopt Amendment 101 to Senate Bill 275.
You've heard the motion, Senator Spearman.
Amendment 101 to Senate Bill 275 does the following. Requires an application for an exemption to include any proof necessary to justify an exemption and a report that demonstrates the need for exemption prepared by a certified public accountant, and amend the effective date of this bill to July 1, 2023 for all other purposes.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 275 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 276, introduced by Senator Lang, revises provisions related to collection agencies. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 155, proposed by the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
If there are no objections, so ordered.
Move that the Senate adopt Amendment 155 to Senate Bill 276.
You've heard the motion, Senator Spearman.
Amendment 155 to Senate Bill 276 makes various changes, including replacing Chief Compliance Officer with Compliance Manager, adjusting definitions and requirements for remote workers, deleting Section 11 to remove certain obligations for collection agencies, modifying the Compliance Manager certification process, exempting specific debt buyers from certain provisions, correcting a conflict concerning confidentiality of certain application information, deleting Sections 42 and 47 concerning the collection of an unsecured claim, and clarifying the Act won't impact civil actions or arbitrations filed or judgments entered before October 1, 2023.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 276 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 301, introduced by Senators Lang, et cetera, and Assemblywoman Gorlow, revises provisions governing public works. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 464, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of Amendment 464.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
I move for the adoption of Amendment 464 to Senate Bill 301.
You've heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Amendment 464 defines construction material or structures to mean aggregate, asphalt, and concrete.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 301, as amended, is ordered, reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 305, introduced by Senators Harris, et cetera, provides for the establishment of a retirement savings program for private sector employees. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 465, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move to dispense with the reading of Amendment 465.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
I move for the adoption of Amendment 465 to Senate Bill 305.
You've heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Amendment 465 revises the definition of covered employer in Section 8, replaces the lieutenant governor with the state treasurer as the chair of the board, required each officer, agency, division, or department of the state to provide information that is necessary for the board to implement the program, allows a covered employer to enroll a covered employee in a similar program offered by the trade association or chamber of commerce, authorizes, with certain exceptions, covered employees to begin making contributions to an individual retirement account on July 1, 2025, and revises the effective date.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 305, as amended, is ordered, reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 318, introduced by Senators Scheibel and Harris, revises provisions related to homeless persons. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 318 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 320, introduced by Senators Harris, et cetera, and Assemblyman Watts, et cetera, revises provisions relating to the legislature. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 466, proposed by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs.
Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move to dispense with the reading of Amendment 466.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Flores.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of Amendment 466 to Senate Bill 320.
You've heard the motion. Senator Flores.
Amendment 466 clarifies that only members elected or appointed on or after November 5th, 2024 may elect to participate in the Public Employment Benefit Program on a full-time basis.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 320, as amended, is ordered, reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Senate Bill 323, introduced by Senators Severs, Gansert, and Hansen, revises provisions relating to peace officers. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 323 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 363, introduced by Senators Spearman, et cetera, and Assemblyman De Silva, revises provisions relating to affordable housing. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 363 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 371, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions governing local governments. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none.
SB 371 is ordered to the general file.
Senate Bill 386, introduced by Commerce and Labor, revises provisions related to barbering. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
I have amendment number 186, proposed by the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
If there are no objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt Amendment 186 to Senate Bill 386.
You've heard the motion. Senator Spearman.
Amendment 186 to Senate Bill 386 does the following. Amends the apprentice licensure process, allowing applicants to retake the exam up to 3 times within 6 months without additional requirements. If an applicant does not retake the exam within this period, they must complete 250 additional school hours before retaking the exam.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. SB 386 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
That concludes Order of Business 12.
Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. May we go back to order of business 9?
Okay, we are back on Order of Business 9. Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bills numbers 2494, 225, 271, 275, 276, 301, 305, and 320 be taken from their positions on general file and referred to the Committee on Finance upon
Very-
reprint. Thank you.
Thank you. You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
That concludes Order of Business 9.
Okay, we are now on Order of Business 13, general file.
Senate Bill 11, introduced by Growth and Infrastructure, requires the Department of Public Safety to adopt certain regulations relating to unmanned aerial vehicles. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2 and to Section 2 and to bill.
Remarks from the floor. Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 11 requires the Department of Public Safety to adopt certain regulations relating to the operation of unmanned aerial vehicles by a public agency, including authorizing a public agency to operate such a vehicle to conduct scheduled inspections to ensure compliance with building and fire codes. The department must adopt regulations prohibiting a public agency from collecting any photographic or recorded evidence during such inspections, which, if collected in violation of such regulations, may not be used to establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause as the basis for the investigation or prosecution of a crime. Further, the regulations adopted by the department must establish a list of unmanned aerial vehicles and related equipment and services that a public agency may not purchase, and a list of businesses, countries, and entities that a public agency may not purchase such equipment from. The bill is effective upon passage and approval for the purposes of adopting any regulations and performing any preparatory administrative tasks, and on October 1st, 2023, for all other purposes.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Secretary will close the roll. 19 yeas, 2 nays. Motion carries. The bill, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 27, introduced by Health and Human Services, revises provisions relating to excavations in areas containing subsurface installations. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 13, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Okay, seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Okay, Senator Cannizzaro.
We need a 1-minute recess, Mr. President.
1 minute recess. All right, the Senate is back in order. We are on SB 27. Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 27 expands the definition of excavation to include the use of non-mechanical equipment operated by a contractor or any person if the movement or removal of earth, rock, or other material in or on the ground occurs more than 12 inches below the surface of the original ground line. Additionally, the bill clarifies the definition of emergency to include requiring immediate action through the use of non-mechanical equipment to determine the severity of an underground leak, or in situations where an excavation is imminent and a subsurface installation is unable to be located, to locate the subsurface installation.
Are there any further remarks on the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 50, introduced by Revenue and Economic Development, revises provisions governing the sales tax holiday for certain members of the Nevada National Guard and certain relatives of such members. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 50 revises provisions governing the sales tax holiday for certain members of the Nevada National Guard. To ensure compliance with the streamlined sales and use tax agreement of which the state of Nevada is a member, Senate Bill 50 revises the process through which members of the Nevada National Guard who are on active duty status and who are residents of this state and certain relatives of such members of the Nevada National Guard can claim an exemption from the sales and use tax on purchases that occur on the date on which Nevada Day is observed or the immediately following Saturday or Sunday. Senate Bill 50 requires the respective eligible member of the Nevada National Guard and his or her relatives to pay the full amount of sales tax to the retailer and submit a request for refund to the Department of Taxation after the purchase.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. The bill has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 85, introduced by Senator Daley, revises provisions relating to retention payments under certain highway contracts. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval. End of bill.
Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 85 changes the amount of money that the Director of Nevada's Department of Transportation is required to retain for certain highway contracts to an amount of 5% of the contract price, but not more than $50,000. The bill also removes the requirement for the department to perform a final inspection, instead provides that the amount retained can be retained until satisfactory completion of the entire project and final acceptance by the director. Lastly, the bill authorizes a subcontractor or supplier who performs work on a project for highway improvement or construction to contact the director to resolve payment disputes if a contractor withholds more than 5% of a required payment. The bill is effective upon passage and approval.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 85 has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 90, introduced by Natural Resources, designates the wild Mustang as the official state horse of the state of Nevada. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Pizzina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 90 designates the wild Mustang as the official state horse of the state of Nevada. And I would also like to thank my colleagues for the very warm welcome they gave the students who were here at their first foray into the legislative process.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too am a horse lover, but I rise in strong opposition to Senate Bill 90. For those of us that represent the rural areas of the state, the wild horse population right now is a huge disaster. For those of you that don't know, in 1971, the federal government took over the management of virtually all the wild horses in the state. They are actually feral horses. By their own law, they are supposed to have a maximum of 14,000 animals in Nevada. Currently, there are almost 60,000 animals in the state. Now, in other words, to get it just back to their own requirements, they would have to remove today 50,000 wild horses. Now, in the absence of them doing that, there has been an absolute ecological disaster in the state of Nevada. The areas of my state that I represent, Lander County, for example, the Lander County Commission just filed a formal declaration of emergency because the horse population in the boundaries of that county are so significant, at least 5 to 10 times over appropriate management levels, that they are harming the indigenous populations of mule deer and bighorn sheep, and they are absolutely devastating riparian zones and other areas of the state. Another county right now that I represent, Elko County, is seriously considering doing a declaration of emergency as well. Now, all this really boils down to the fact that the federal government has failed to do what they're required to do by law. And I don't know how you define it, but if you don't obey a law, that's a crime. However, when it's the federal government that's committing the crime and harming the state of Nevada, what recourse do we have? Now, our own federal delegation, I know right now, one of our United States senators, and I know Congressman Amodei, are working very aggressively to try to raise the funds necessary to get the horse management levels back to appropriate management levels. In other words, they're going to try to remove 50,000 horses. In the meantime, though, we as a legislative body are sending the wrong message nationally. We need to be supporting our federal delegation in their efforts to try to get some funding for the BLM and the Forest Service to be able to do their job. And by us sending this message, where we make the wild horse the official animal of the state of Nevada, basically, that is absolutely the worst possible message we could send at this time. And, you know, if you had been in the hearing, and I realize this isn't an issue for most of you, that you really, what do you care about, whether or not we designate an animal something in the state? But that sends a signal nationally that the state of Nevada, the official representatives of the state, are happy with the situation that we have right now in the state. We're happy enough that we're actually going to delegate a feral animal. Remember, these are not native indigenous species. And we're going to send a message that the current management practices by the federal government basically pass muster, at least according to the Nevada Legislature. That is absolutely the wrong message to send. I also represent the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, the Fort McDermott Indian Reservation, the Duck Valley Indian Reservation. I've got at least 4 Indian colonies in my district. The Indians are very upset about the idea that we are going to designate a non-indigenous species basically as an indigenous animal that we want to say is a good thing. Actually, those horses are harming, especially one population. For Nevada right now, bighorn sheep are our official mammal, okay? Bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep populations are currently dropping rapidly in Nevada. Mule deer populations. Right now, mule deer are down to 75,000 animals. Those populations are being dramatically impacted by the excessive levels of horses that we have in the state. Now, if we were able to get the federal government to obey its own law and get those numbers down, we could probably fairly quickly see a recovery. Now, and sometimes there's unintended consequences. For example, for those who have been here a while, you remember when sage grouse was a huge issue? Well, what we found out was we had, because of man-created food sources, including garbage dumps, roadkill, domestic animal carcasses, we had this enormous spike in raven populations, 1,500% over what they were historically. And they were absolutely and continue to dramatically impact sage grouse reproduction. Right now, as we speak, the federal government is spreading over 10,000 poisoned eggs across the state of Nevada in key sage grouse breeding areas to reduce raven populations. What does that have to do with horses? We have a very similar circumstance. Right now, the Department of Wildlife has estimated that we have 3,000 mountain lions in Nevada. That is substantially higher than what it would normally be in the absence of these horse populations, which they are eating. Now, the real problem is, because we, just like with the ravens, we have created essentially a non-native food source. Those mountain lions are harming our native populations of bighorn sheep and mule deer. And those things are going down as we speak, while horse populations continue to escalate. So very much like the ravens, at some point we're going to have a real catastrophe in Nevada when you have artificially high predator populations and rapidly declining prey species like the native populations of mule deer and bighorn sheep. And by the way, after a winter like we're having right now, our prey species, that's mule deer, bighorns, and so forth, they're going to be going down anyway, and to then artificially prop up the predator population is absolutely a formula for disaster in the state of Nevada for those animals. So as a horse lover, I just want everybody to know I really do like seeing Mustangs, okay? I've watched them, you know, for those of you who don't know, I've spent a good portion of my adult life in the back country of Nevada. I love that. I still do. It's one of the great treats. And watching a band of Mustangs run across the sagebrush plains of Nevada is a great thrill to this day. But I also recognize that because they're not an indigenous species, we have to manage those populations. And the failure of doing that is harming, significantly harming, the native populations. And that's also why I think the Indians in Nevada are especially upset about this. By the way, they have done an excellent job managing. If you don't know, the Fort McDermott Indian Tribe and the Pyramid Lake Indian Tribe have had several significant roundups of Mustangs off of their reservations because they are clearly impacting their populations there, and they did what needed to be done. Now, because they are a sovereign nation, they are allowed to do that. We as a sovereign state, frankly, can't. So while my counties are declaring emergencies over this situation, we should be supporting those. We should be working very hard with our federal delegation to try to get this problem resolved. And ultimately, I think it's incumbent on us, before we basically put the feral horses on a pedestal and turn them into almost a somewhat deified, glorified thing in the state of Nevada, we better recognize the impact that those animals are having on our native wildlife and our native plant communities. I've obviously spoken more than I should have on this probably, but if you really want to get into the details on it, if you'd been in the hearing where every range management person in the state of Nevada, every wildlife person in the state of Nevada, everybody that has any real knowledge about what's going on the range testified against this bill. Now, ironically enough, you guys are siding, if you vote for this, with Elon Musk, who, by the way, I love. But old Elon, and he in Story County, they love these horses. They think this is great. So, Elon, my friend, I love you. I think you're a brilliant man. But on wild horses, man, you got it way wrong, okay? And so, in conclusion, what I want to say, if I can wind it up here, I'm waiting for Marilyn to wave the red flag here. Yep, you're getting close. I knew once I mentioned that Marilyn and Elon Musk were on the same side on an issue that there was going to be an issue here. No, in all seriousness, we need to sit back and think about this. When we should vote no on this, we should support our federal delegation and not do anything except send the message to the federal government that we need more money for the BLM and the Forest Service to get these herd management levels back to what their own law requires. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gokachia.
Thank you. I will not be as long nor as eloquent as my colleague from Northern Nevada. I rise in support of SB 90. You know, the bottom line is there's no other, and that's what this is about, horse that is more iconic to the state of Nevada than the wild Mustang. I mean, what horse are we going to call? An Appaloosa, a quarter horse, a thoroughbred? Now, I do agree with my colleague, and it's not in the bill, and I hope we can get some language included when it does go to the other side. We need to talk about management. Clearly, the wild horse populations in this state are out of control, and I've just lived with them just a little bit longer than my colleague from Sparks, but I have grown up and lived with wild horses my whole life. And I believe that if we don't get some language in this bill, the state of Nevada is going to have to bring a lawsuit against the federal government to bring these horses back into compliance with the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971 as amended. There's a set number. The federal government is in violation of their own law, and we need to capture that. Yes, they are damaging the state, but what animal, what horse, I shouldn't say animal, what horse would we make Nevada's horse? Clearly, the Mustang. I ask you to support this bill because that's what it does.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 18, the nays are 3. SB 90 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed, and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 113, introduced by Senators Goicoechea, Titus, Buck, Hanson, Stone, and Krasner, revises provisions relating to groundwater management plans. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3 and to Section 3 and to bill.
Remarks from the floor. Senator Goicoechea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 113 relates to groundwater management plans. It revises provisions to groundwater management plans by providing that a petition for the approval of a groundwater management plan must be signed by the holders of permits and certificates to appropriate water in a basin who represent a majority of the total groundwater permitted or certificated in the basin. The bill also requires the state engineer to affirm, modify the perennial yield of a basin at the time that he or she designates a basin as a critical management area. Also offers the state engineer to modify the perennial yield for a critical management area based on the best science. Senate Bill 113 also requires the state engineer to review the perennial yield before reviewing the results of a groundwater management plan and modify the perennial yield if there has been a change. Additionally, the bill provides circumstances for which holders of permits and certificates to appropriate water in a basin are not required to comply with an approved groundwater plan. Finally, SB 113 requires the state engineer to review approved groundwater management plans that have been in effect for 10 consecutive years to determine whether there has been significant progress towards stabilizing the water table of the water level of that basin, and if not, with certain exceptions, to order a groundwater management plan dissolved and restrict withdrawals of groundwater to conform with priority rights until the water level has been stabilized. Bill's effective October 1st, 2023. Long and short of this, we kind of missed 10, 12 years ago when we brought the critical management statute in, came through the Supreme Court. We're just kind of clean it up and get it defined to where we can have groundwater management plans and we can, in fact, effectuate curtailment by priority. Thank you. I appreciate your support of this bill.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 113 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed, and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 131, introduced by Senators Canizaro, et cetera, and Assemblywoman Anderson, et cetera, revises provisions relating to reproductive health care. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 5, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval. End of bill.
Senator Canizaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in very strong support of Senate Bill 131, which plainly seeks to codify Governor Sisolak's Executive Order 2022-08. That particular executive order came to be something in this state after last summer. And, for nearly 50 years, the right to privacy and control over one's own body, the ability to seek reproductive care, including abortion care, was widely understood, was widely accepted, was something that was true across the nation. It was a protected right under the United States Constitution and that Roe versus Wade precedent. And when that was overturned, that 50-plus year precedent, it sort of left everyone in a bit of a quandary as to what was going to happen. What did that mean for states? What were states going to do? And one of the things we know in Nevada is that we do have a statutory right to that, something that was enacted by the voters. Statutory right. And so one of the things that happened immediately in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which overruled Roe versus Wade, was that Governor Sisolak signed an executive order that said, if you come to Nevada and you seek reproductive care, to include abortion care, which is legal in Nevada, that we are not going to participate in another state's attempt to prosecute you for what you did while you were in Nevada. Similarly, if you are a healthcare provider who is providing services within the scope of your practice that are within the appropriate and proper standards of that practice, then we are also not going to assist other states in prosecuting you. And if you are a provider who is going to come to Nevada and you provide reproductive care, including abortion care, and in another state you had an issue because you were providing that reproductive care, not because you were providing it outside of your scope of practice, that you were licensed to do so, not that you were performing it in an improper manner, but that the only issue is that you are providing something that now that state is seeking or has sought or did make illegal, that we will still consider you in our licensing boards. That executive order stands today. It is something that has not yet been removed or expired or sunsetted by the current administration, which, in Nevada, I think we should be very grateful for. But one of the things I think to keep in mind is that it is an executive order. It's not statutory. It's not a protection that can be relied on in a substantive way. And so Senate Bill 131 seeks to codify that into law and to align our practices here in Nevada with what our current law is and what is legal here in Nevada. And the one thing that I think we can all agree has happened since this last summer in the Dobbs decision, in the wake of that, is that many states are taking action not only to limit their own citizens from seeking reproductive care, but to seek to prosecute and go after providers who are operating outside of that state's borders and to prosecute patients who are seeking care outside of that state's borders. This is an attempt to restrict the actions of states like Nevada where that sort of care is legal, and to restrict the actions and ability of providers to provide care and for patients to seek that care. And there are many states that are doing this and many stories that have come out since this particular decision. Ohio put in one of the strictest, most restrictive bans on abortion in the country. And immediately there was a case of a 10-year-old rape victim, a 10-year-old, who had to travel to another state to try to seek care so that she didn't have to carry her rapist baby. That, to me, is something that is unfathomable for a whole host of reasons. But does happen. I served a long time in a former career, over a decade, as a prosecutor. These kinds of cases happen. For a young girl to have to do that and then to come back to Ohio and say, well, now that you've done something that was legal somewhere else, we don't like it, so we're still going to try to come after you, is something that the state of Nevada should not be in a position of assisting with, especially where that is legal here. So anything that's happening in Nevada with respect to reproductive care, including abortion care, is currently legal in Nevada. There are similar stories out of Mississippi, again with a teenage rape victim who had to travel, and again is in fear of having to face criminal charges from that. And in other states where women are being denied timely care for ectopic pregnancies, for miscarriage management, when and if they're in Nevada, or if you are a Nevadan who is seeking that kind of care, you should not fear that if you were to go to another state, that they would prosecute you for that, or that we're going to participate in that because what you did here was legal. And I'll give you a great example of, there's a whole lot of things in Nevada that are legal that might not be legal in other states. Imagine if someone came here and went down to the Strip and gambled in the casinos and spent a bunch of money and won a little bit of money, and then went back to their home state, and their home state said, you know what, gambling is illegal here, and you did that while you were in Nevada, so now we're going to prosecute you. That is the exact same situation that is happening here. and they want the state of Nevada to come in and support that prosecution. And if you're a gaming, regular, an operator, someone who has gambling in a casino and you're operating that casino, now you could also be subject to criminal prosecution for doing stuff that is legal here in Nevada. And the same concept applies to this particular situation. And so this bill will ensure that the statutory protections that we have put in place since 1990 with a voters' initiative, and then that this body has also strengthened with other pieces of legislation, like the Trust Nevada Women's Act from 2019, where we removed our criminal penalties from state law because they were inconsistent with what the current law was, that remains a solid and firm understanding of not only Nevada law, but of what patients and providers can expect. And in a state where we rank something like 48th in providers for healthcare, to say that we are going to not take action to ensure that the providers who are providing reproductive care have to also now fear when they're trying to provide that care, to take that extra step to say, well, am I going to be prosecuted somehow for this? Is someone going to come? Is another state going to ask for extradition so that they can prosecute me criminally for something that I'm doing that is legal? I think the answer from this body and from the state of Nevada should resoundingly be no. And frankly, if you are in a situation where a provider has to help make a decision about a miscarriage, the last thing you want is to be sent home and hope that it just gets bad enough that a provider now doesn't feel like they might not be subject to criminal prosecution in order to provide you care. It's not the law in Nevada. A couple of things I just want to highlight, because I know they've come up as concerns on this bill. This does not mean that doctors or providers can provide incompetent care, that they can do that without a license, that they can operate outside their scope of practice, that somehow if they were doing something that was tantamount to fraudulent or that was tantamount to medical malpractice or otherwise were violating any of the tenets of their profession, this does not allow that. This does not allow the state to look the other way. This doesn't allow for them to not face repercussions. All of that still stays in place. This does not change anything about Nevada's current law with respect to reproductive care or abortion. It just says that if you're doing something here that is currently legal, we are not going to extradite you to another state. We're not going to participate in that. And if you're a provider, you don't have to worry about, as long as you're providing accurate, competent care for your patients, you don't have to worry about us extraditing you or subjecting you to criminal penalties. That is consistent with Nevada law. And frankly, it is, I think, the assurance that our patients and our healthcare providers need. This is something that is extremely important, and I think is the right step to ensure that something like an executive order that has been in place and has been working and has not resulted in any of the immensely absurd situations that have been brought up as opposition to this bill. That is not what is happening in Nevada. It's not what has happened since June. And so I hope that we are not going to entertain some of those conspiracy theories about what Nevada is going to turn into, because it has been almost a year of this being in place and we have not seen that happen. So I would urge my colleagues to vote yes for patients, for providers. This is working in Nevada and it is consistent with Nevada law. And it is frankly the reassurance that I think we all need here in Nevada. So I would urge your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate the comments from the Majority Leader. I just want to put some of my own comments on the record just succinctly, in that we had a discussion the other day about a resolution that I was in opposition to, as were many of my colleagues. And part of what we discussed and what's relevant today is that the Dobbs decision allows for states to decide what they're going to do around reproductive health. And so we recognize that states vary from one to another. What we heard the other day was very personal testimony from our colleagues, a couple of our colleagues, about challenges that they faced and how personal those decisions are and how difficult it is sometimes to think about things. And in your life, and I know it affected me. Those statements affected me, and that when I look at this legislation and the current executive order, and given the hodgepodge of laws across the U.S., the one thing that jumps off the page to me is women who face these difficult choices. That we need to give them our support and our prayers, but we don't need to give them jail time. And so that's why I'll be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. Ayes are 15, the nays are 6. SB 131 has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 134, introduced by Senator Severs Gansert, et cetera, and Assemblywoman Kasama, et cetera, revises provisions relating to vision insurance. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Senator Severs Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 134 expands existing prohibitions on an insurer from entering into a contract with a provider of vision care that imposes certain conditions. The prohibitions also apply to contracts that authorize the insurer to set a limit or to set or limit the amount that the provider of vision care may charge for vision care that is not reimbursed under the contract, or require the provider to use a specific laboratory as a manufacturer of ophthalmic devices or materials provided to covered persons. In addition, the mandatory provisions of this bill are not applicable to any current contracts between an insurer and provider of vision care unless and until those contracts are renewed after October 1st, 2023. The bill is effective on October 1st, 2023. Thank you.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 169 has received a constitutional majority. I'm sorry. SB 134 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 169, introduced by Government Affairs, revises provisions governing master plans. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 5, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2024, end of bill.
Senator Orenshall.
Thank you, President. Senate Bill 169 requires the master plan in a county with a population of 100,000 or more, currently Clark and Washoe counties, to include a heat mitigation element. The legislation also sets forth the requirements for this heat mitigation element, including a plan to develop strategies such as cooling spaces, public drinking water, cool building practices, shade over paved surfaces, and urban tree canopies.
Are there any further remarks on the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 18, the nays are 3. SB 169 has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 172, introduced by Senators Harris, et cetera, revises provisions governing the ability of a minor to consent to certain health care services. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval. End of bill.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 172 provides that a minor may give express consent to a physician, physician assistant, registered nurse, or pharmacist for the provision of healthcare services to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, including prescribing, dispensing, or administering a contraceptive drug or device without the consent or notification of the minor's parent or legal guardian. The bill also provides that a physician, physician assistant, registered nurse, or pharmacist who is an employee or volunteer at a family resource center that has received grant funding is authorized to examine and treat a minor who is suspected of having been infected with a sexually transmitted disease without consent of a parent or legal guardian. The bill is effective upon passage and approval.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Severs Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so I just have some comments about what I think is relevant to this bill. And this bill basically is about a minor being able to give consent to be able to get treatment for STDs, actually not treatment, medications that will prevent them from getting an STD or STI, and it's also about birth control. And so I was looking up some information on the National Institute of Health's website, and there's an article, The Growing Epidemic of Sexually Transmitted Infections in Adolescents, a Neglected Population, by C.L. Shannon and J.D. Klausner from 2018. Essentially it says, while 15 to 24-year-olds only make up about 25% of our population, they're almost 50% of those who are infected by sexually transmitted diseases, by STDs. And that the rate of infection is significantly high. And then when you look at STDs, there's 8 that are the most common. Of 4 of those are treatable but not curable. And the one by far that is most infectious, that has the fastest rate, is HPV. And it's estimated that 80% of sexually active people in the U.S. actually have been infected with HPV, and that 14 million new cases are there's 14 million new cases every year. And I think those are critical numbers. And when we look at adolescents, they don't always necessarily go to their parents to ask for birth control if they're underage, or they don't ask for treatment for STDs. I mean, that's like a really embarrassing thing, I think, for a lot of children to talk to their parents about. And I am the mother of 4, and I can tell you none of my children ever came to me, and right now they're 24 to 30, so we're outside of this range. And so when I looked at this bill, I thought it was more important to be able to prevent an infection and have an adolescent be able to go to these types of providers, so physicians, physician's assistants, nurses, and pharmacists, to be able to get that kind of medication in advance, also recognizing that if they are infected, they can get that without parental consent. So for STDs, adolescents can get treatment once they have an STD, but this allows them to get something that's going to prevent it. So I think that's critically important. And then on the birth control front, you know, I'm pro-life. I've always been pro-life. And if you're able to get somebody birth control, they're not going to get pregnant. Then they're not going to have that choice, that tough decision that we just discussed about a little bit ago. So I am going to be voting for this bill because as a parent, and given the experience that I've had and others, and given the rate of infection for STDs or STIs, and given the difficult decision women may face if they do become pregnant at a very early age, I'll be supporting this legislation. Thank you.
Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 172. As a parent, you know, minors getting significant medical issues like getting these types of medications, there are reactions to medications. No doctor in their right mind is going to have some 12, 14-year-old come to them and then give them stuff behind their parents' backs and then face the consequences if there is a reaction to the medications that they're given. You know, people in our public schools can't give a pupil an aspirin, but here we're going to have people going behind their parents' backs and getting medications that could have substantial health risks to that child. There's all sorts of reactions that occurred, all sorts of medications. So, and honestly, the biggest issue is, do we really want to remove parents from this decision-making process? Because that's really what we're doing here. We're going behind the backs of the parents and encouraging minors. And by the way, the definition of minor, the bottom end of it, is unlimited. You could be 9 years old and go to a medical doctor and get this sort of these sorts of services. So, for the good of the parents of the state of Nevada, I think we should be doing all we can to support parental involvement in these kind of medical decisions. And I can't imagine any doctor in their right mind giving a significant, any kind of medicine, birth control, sexually transmitted disease type medications, without consenting with a parent. It's crazy, especially if there was a reaction to it. Kid had, you know, people die from this sort of stuff. So we absolutely want to make sure that parents are included in the process, and this bill removes that, and I think that's a huge mistake. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote no on Senate Bill 172.
Senator Harris.
Thank you for the second bite, Mr. President. I just want to acknowledge something that my colleague here from District 14 just mentioned. Currently today, there are providers who are prescribing medication to treat minors for STDs, to treat them. They're already getting medication, potentially without their parental consent. And I'll say what I said when we had the bill hearing. Minors, please talk to your parents. If you feel comfortable, involve your parents in all important decisions of your life. That's not what this is about. Our medical community already is willing to prescribe medication to treat STDs and take on any potential liability that will come with that. This will ensure that minors do not result in having permanent conditions with STDs that are not treatable, and pregnancy is also a permanent condition. Being a parent is a permanent condition, and so this doesn't necessarily remove parent from the discussion. I would always encourage parents to talk to their or minors to talk to their parents about things like this. However, it simply makes zero sense to allow a minor to get treated for something, but not allow them to try and get prevention on the front end. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition for a few reasons. One, parental consent, and also that a child may not be aware of allergies that they have or contraindications that may conflict with a medication that they're using. I also believe that there is some litigation that challenged immunizations being given to youngsters without parental consent. I believe there's a court decision on that, so I think that might be an issue with the constitutionality of this bill, and for those reasons I'm going to vote no today. Thank you.
Any further remarks? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The ayes are 14, the nays are 7. SB 172 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed, and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 203, introduced by Senator Doñate, prohibits certain gifts by a manufacturer or wholesaler of drugs or medical devices to a practitioner. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 under Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 5, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 203 prohibits the wholesaler or manufacturer of certain drugs, medicines, chemicals, devices, or appliances, or any agent thereof from offering or giving a gift to a practitioner or otherwise directly or indirectly arranging, facilitating, or serving as a conduit for such gift. The bill sets forth certain items and expenditures that do not constitute as gifts. In addition, the bill requires the State Board of Pharmacy to post on its internet website a link to publicly available information concerning any gift provided to a practitioner by a manufacturer that is required to be reported pursuant to federal law.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition of Senate Bill 203. I know that the bill is well-intended, and I know that many folks in this body paint pharma, big pharma, as horrible monsters. However, I will tell you that the pharmaceutical industry has done absolutely wonderful things to their overall health globally. And particularly in my office, I will have to tell you, as a rural family practice doc that didn't have a lot of equipment and being 30 miles away from the nearest pharmacy, I had the gift of a pediatric resuscitation kit that would now fall prohibited in this bill from a pharmaceutical rep. I use that to save a life. And I will tell you that I will be forever grateful to that farm rep who gave me that resuscitation kit for pediatrics. And I feel strongly that although, again, this bill is well-intended, the unintended consequences, I feel, are even more. So I will be a no on Senate Bill 203. Thank you.
Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make a quick clarification as to the intent of the bill. Many folks know that I serve as a healthcare administrator as part of my day job outside of the legislature. And the rationale as to why I believe this bill was important was every day, I have interacted with multiple clinics. And this is not in relation to how pharmaceutical reps come into the clinic. What I believe was a question that I had was a few months into one of the clinics that I had taken over as an administrator, I noticed that every day we were scheduling lunches. And it begged to question when I went up to my staff, I asked them, how long was this practice going on? And they mentioned, well, it's been happening since I started working here. My staff had worked in that office for 5-7 years. And I think it begs a philosophical question, which is, how does gifts from certain individuals or institutions influence the decision-making that we have as practitioners or as healthcare providers? It was a question that I asked myself where if my patients that I I work in geriatrics. If the patients that come up to me tell me that they have to ration their medications, meanwhile, my physician could be subject to personal gifts, that is something that should be addressed. I did work with the pharmaceutical industry on this bill. That was reflected on the amendment. We wanted to make sure that they were encompassing and that we heard their thoughts. And to the clarification to the point that was made by my colleague from the north, I envisioned that question coming up with medical samples and devices and to the references of that was mentioned. And luckily in Section 1, subsection 2 of the bill, that is covered. And so I encourage my colleagues to vote yes in this bill.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone, Senator Daley? Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 16, the nays are 5. SB 203 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 208, introduced by Senators Flores, et cetera, requires counties and cities to enact certain ordinances relating to battery charged fences. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 4, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 208 requires a governing body of a county or city to enact an ordinance that regulates battery charge fences. The bill prohibits the ordinances from requiring a permit for the installation or use of a battery charge fence that is in addition to an alarm system. Permit issued by the county or city imposes installation or operational requirements for a battery charge fence that are inconsistent with the standards set forth by the International Electrotechnical Commission, or prohibiting the installation or use of a battery charge fence.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Secretary, close the roll. The yeses are 20, the nays are 1. SB 208 has received the constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 215, introduced by Legislative Operations and Elections, revises provisions relating to mechanical voting machines and mechanical recording devices. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, President. Senate Bill 215 requires the governing body of a county or city to return any money appropriated by the Nevada Legislature or a grant of funds given to that county or city by the Nevada Secretary of State for the purchase of a mechanical voting system or mechanical recording device. If the county or city discontinues the use of the system or device and requires voting in person at the polls be conducted only by paper ballot. And we had discussion during committee. This bill is prospective. It is not retroactive, so it would not affect anything that happened prior to the effective date of July 1st, 2023.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am a member of the Legislative Operations and Elections Committee. We did go through this bill, and the chair of that committee is correct. It is prospective, but recognizing that we have a distributed election system, meaning each county makes their own decisions, I'm going to vote in opposition to this because there may be, I believe our last election was safe and fair, secure and fair. It's not about the last election, but I also recognize our counties are fiercely independent. And if they have a voting machine and at some point in time they decide they're not going to use that voting machine, they need to be able to have that without having a fiscal penalty. So therefore, I will be opposing Senate Bill 215. Thank you.
Any further remarks from the floor? Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I believe Senate Bill 215 really does protect our taxpayers, and it puts every city clerk, county registrar on an equal footing, because after the effective date, if a county or city does not want to use these devices for elections, they don't have to accept any funding, either from the legislature or from the Secretary of State. So I believe everybody would have their eyes open as to what they want to do and be able to make that decision. Thank you.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. Yeses are 13, the nays are 8. SB 215 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 239, introduced by Senators Flores, et cetera, and Assemblywoman Torres, et cetera, establishes provisions governing the prescribing, dispensing, and administering of medication designed to end the life of a patient. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 52, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval. End of bill.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 239 authorizes a patient who suffers from an incurable and irreversible condition that, according to reasonable medical judgment, will result in death within 6 months to self-administer a medication that is designed to end the life of the patient. The bill outlines certain requirements concerning the manner in which a patient may request and a physician or an advanced practice registered nurse may prescribe and dispense a medication designed to end the life of the patient. Among other things, the bill requires an attending physician who prescribes such a controlled substance to include certain information in the patient's medical record and provide certain information to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health of the Department of Health and Human Services. Senate Bill 239 also exempts certain healthcare providers from professional discipline, provides immunity from civil and criminal liability, and clarifies that a healthcare provider does not violate any applicable standard of care for taking certain actions associated with assisting a patient to end the patient's life. Under the bill, a physician is not required to prescribe, and a pharmacist is not required to fill a prescription for such medication. Also, the owner or operator of a healthcare facility may prohibit a person from providing end-of-life related services while on the premises of the facility. Furthermore, a death resulting from self-administration of medication designed to end the life of a patient does not constitute suicide or homicide, and a patient's death certificate must list a terminal condition as a cause of death. Additionally, the bill provides immunity to local governments, coroners, and law enforcement agencies from civil and criminal penalties related to self-administration of such a medication. Finally, the bill prohibits insurers from engaging in certain practices, including charging a higher rate because a person makes certain decisions to end the life of the person.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first I want to say I commend the author from District 2 for his leadership with this bill to seek the minimizing of the suffering of those who have terminal illnesses. Minimizing the suffering of terminally ill patients is something that we all can agree on. Unfortunately, I oppose this approach for a number of reasons that I'll describe. This dangerous public policy threatens our most vulnerable populations despite the so-called safeguards that are in this bill: the elderly, people with disabilities, the terminally ill. I also will note that the United States Supreme Court, before President Trump was president, also recognized the real risk of subtle coercion and undue influence that assisted suicide poses. See the case of Washington versus Glucksberg. Elder abuse is considered a major healthcare problem in the United States, with federal estimates that 1 in 10 people are abused. Placing lethal drugs in the hands of potential abusers, including potentially some greedy loved ones, generates a major risk for elderly persons. Assisted suicide cannot be appropriately regulated and is ripe for coercion and abuse. There is no way to ensure that coercion, abuse, and harm will not befall vulnerable populations if this legislation is enacted. One only needs to look at the state of Oregon that has had physician-assisted suicide on the books longer than any other state for such abuses, which have been well documented and I brought forward during our committee meeting. This may also incentivize insurances from not allowing new cutting-edge pharmaceuticals, albeit expensive, that have been proven to extend life, in some cases by many years, through clinical studies. Oregon Medicaid and California Medi-Cal is on the record for providing letters informing terminally ill patients that it will not cover such life-saving drugs, but in the same letter, advises patients who are grasping at any attempt to prolong their lives to instead subscribe to assisted suicide drug cocktails. This can especially affect poorer communities that do not have the financial resources to pay for such new treatments, And in many cases, Medicaid will not cover such life-prolonging medications because of their high costs, in contrast to more affluent populations that can get these drugs through their private payers or just pay for them directly. The financial wherewithal of a patient should never play into the equation as to whether life-prolonging drugs should or should not be employed. Is this equal justice for all? Will Nevada Medicaid follow the same draconian rules that Oregon and California have today? There are no protections in this bill to stop this discrimination. Here is a Nevada example. Nevada physician Dr. Brian Callister once testified when he tried to transfer patients from their home states to Oregon and California for disease treatments that were not available here in Nevada because we didn't have the healthcare professionals that had those specialties. Insurers in both states rejected his transfers and instead volunteered. Would you consider assisted suicide for both these patients? Dr. Callister said both patients had good chances for a cure with treatment, but will be terminal without them. This was written in the Washington Times article on 5/31/2017. This bill also may be a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act by requiring administration of the drug. What about advanced cases of Lou Gehrig's disease or other diseases where the patient is completely paralyzed and cannot self-administer these drugs? Present-day pharmaceutical armamentarians, I can tell you from my profession, are incredible. We have wonderful drugs that ease the suffering pharmacologically of people that are suffering from pain, and hospices must be commended for their compassionate care of the terminally ill, administering these palliative drugs to effectively reduce and in many cases eliminate pain and suffering. I know this to be true because my specialty as a compounding pharmacist over the past 25 years has been in pain control, consulting to numerous pain control clinics throughout the state of California and yes, even in Nevada. So you may ask, what is the definition of a natural death? Death caused solely by disease or natural processes. It is my belief that the body, designed by our Creator, has natural protective mechanisms that allow at a certain point in our natural life, when our bodies succumb to a natural death, like a computer shuts down, so does the human body. While no one has ever come back to tell us whether the experience was pleasant or unpleasant, I believe it to be an immediate suffering elimination process. Interrupting this natural process may even be more what I would call unnatural suffering. So what do I mean? The drug cocktails that are used in assisted suicide vary, but usually contain a fast-acting barbiturate, which works by putting the part of your brain that makes you breathe automatically without thinking about it to sleep. So how do patients being given these physician-assisted suicide drugs actually work? The patients are suffocated to death. Can you imagine being suffocated but cannot move or fight to breathe? Is this compassionate? I don't believe that it is. Hence, I believe in a natural death that can be hastened but not caused by our advanced medicines and maybe less sufferings. Now, there's a couple of religious aspects. I, like many of you, probably received the letter from the National Catholic Conference. Many of you know that I'm Jewish, but I'm also married to a devout Catholic, and we respect all religions. I received the letter dated April 6, 2023 from the bishops of Las Vegas, Most Reverend George Leo Thomas and Gregory Gordon, and the Bishop of Reno, the Most Reverend Daniel Muggenborg, who are all members of the Nevada Catholic Conference regarding this bill. The letter outlines their concerns as follows. The Church believes in dignity of all human life from conception to death, and that God alone is the author of life and the sole arbiter of death. Palliative care works and provides comfort, dignity, and respect for all human life. Concerns about economic conditions, not ethical decisions, often determine care and care that terminally ill patients may receive. Concerns of insurance companies preferring low-cost physician-assisted suicides as opposed to the expensive and promising life-saving drugs that are approved. And they also mention concerns about the elderly, people with disabilities, and those that are battling depression, being the most vulnerable and pressured into assisted suicide. And to conclude, the Catholic Church is officially opposed to SB 239 for the reasons that I've just outlined. I also spoke to my personal rabbi, Rabbi Fuss, and he referred me to the writings about this subject by Rabbi Yitzhak Bretzowitz, who wrote, "Judaism does not endorse mercy killing, whether it's in a form of euthanasia or suicide." He then writes, "When assisted suicide becomes legal and socially acceptable, one can easily visualize scenarios where persons who truly want to live, given the chance and the encouragement, will instead opt for death, viewing their lives as worthless, non-productive, and a drain on their families." He concludes by stating what starts off as a right to die turns into an obligation. And lastly, my colleagues, the American Medical Association says this: physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally inconsistent with the physician's professional role. So it is for these reasons and many more that I respectfully oppose SB 239, and I urge my colleagues to vote the same. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The ayes are 11, the nays are 10. SB 239 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 249, introduced by Senators Lang, et cetera, and Assemblyman Nguyen, revises provisions relating to cosmetology. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 65, end of Section 65, end of bill. This bill requires a two-thirds majority vote.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 249 makes various changes to provisions governing the practice and licensure of cosmetology, hair design, aesthetics, nail technology, shampoo technology, and electrocologists, and the State Board of Cosmetology, including but not limited to authorizing the board to make appropriate legal action in any court competent jurisdiction to recover the amount of fine imposed by the board, revising definitions of cosmetology estheticians, including prohibitive cosmetologists and esthetician from using certain aesthetic medical devices, and authorizing such professionals to perform procedures and aesthetic purposes, requiring the board to adopt reasonable regulations identifying each non-ablative aesthetic medical procedure that an advanced esthetician is authorized to perform. It also revises charges and fees that we imposed last year in last session, and revises training requirements. I urge you to vote in favor of this bill. It just basically makes clarifying changes from last session's major changes that we made to the esthetician bill. Thank you.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this bill. I believe it's a good bill. It fixes a lot that happened last session. It's really good for women-owned businesses out there, especially all of our estheticians. It clarifies language, and thank you to my colleague who went to work for this. Thank you.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The ayes are 20, the nays are 1. The bill has received a constitutional two-thirds majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 252, introduced by Senator Flores, revises provisions governing civil actions. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, end of subsection 2, end of bill.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 252 expands the list of costs that a court is authorized or required to award to a prevailing party in a civil action, depending on certain factors, to include fees for the provisions of a focus group assembled to provide feedback on strategies or techniques regarding the action.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to SB 252. I had a very interesting conversation with the gentleman, I can't think of his name, the attorney that presented the bill. And what it really boiled down to was in the types of cases this gentleman was involved in, which were $1 million cases, it made sense to do this. The problem is, by making it mandatory, it would also apply for the cases well below the type of level of type of case this gentleman practiced. And right now, under current law, a judge does have the discretion to, when they do these sorts of practices, agree to make it part of the costs of the trial. So I would prefer that we leave it like it currently is and allow some discretion to the judge rather than make it mandatory, which a great deal of people are very concerned will simply raise the cost of all litigation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was hoping to get some clarification from the sponsor of the bill on whether it is mandatory for the court to award these costs or whether it's just mandatory for the court to consider awarding them, but still leaves it in the discretion of the court to determine whether or not they're reasonable in the particular case.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to my colleague from the South for the question. Upon the enactment of this bill, the court will consider, but is not obligated to award. And there is now the possibility, and it is absolutely true, as my colleague from the North indicated, that they could be awarded. The issue that we have is that we don't have equity, and what I mean by that is it's not always happening. And when we don't have a set rule, it creates for scenarios where in one instance they're being awarded while they're not even being considered in a different instance. What we are doing now with this enactment of this bill is to ensure that they're always considered. And it's always ultimately going to be in the discretion of the judge whether or not they decide to award reasonable cost.
Thank you. Any other further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The ayes are 13. The nays are 8. SB 252 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 264, introduced by Senators Doñate and Pazina, revises provisions relating to collective bargaining. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 264 provides that a civilian employee of a metropolitan police department may be a member of an employee organization only if the employee organization is composed exclusively of such civilian employees. And just a quick background information, if the mandatory provisions of this bill conflict with the collective bargaining agreement that was entered before October 1st, 2023, they do not apply. However, the provisions do apply to any extension or renewal of such an agreement and to any agreement entered into on or after the date.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the yeses are 20, the nays are 1. SB 264 has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 270, introduced by Senator Scheibel, revises provisions governing massage therapists. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 270 enacts the Interstate Massage Compact. The Interstate Massage Compact creates a multi-state licensing pathway with uniform licensing requirements to allow a person who is licensed as a massage therapist in a state that is a member of the compact to provide services in other states that are also members of the compact. Before providing such services, the compact requires a member state as well as a massage therapist to meet certain requirements. In addition, the bill increases from 4 to 5 the number of Board of Massage Therapy members needed to constitute a quorum for the purposes of transacting the business of the board.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 270 is declared has received a majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 283, introduced by Senators Pazina, et cetera, revises certain provisions relating to health care records. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 5 and to Section 5 and a bill.
Senator Pazina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 283 requires a custodian of healthcare records to transmit a copy of healthcare records in an electronic format using a secure electronic transmission method if the authorized person requests the healthcare records to be furnished electronically. The bill similarly requires an insurer, employer, or third-party administrator to electronically transmit any healthcare records concerning an occupational injury or disease to an injured employee or authorized person in electronic format upon request. The bill authorizes a fee of up to $15 for providing a copy of healthcare records in an electronic format.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 283 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 309, introduced by Senators Canizaro, et cetera, makes various changes relating to health care. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 22, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, and a bill.
Senator Canizaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 309 creates the crime of fertility fraud and provides associated criminal penalties for committing such an offense. A healthcare provider who commits fertility fraud by implanting his or her human reproductive material in a patient without their consent, or who implants human reproductive material in a patient other than expressly agreed to by a patient, is guilty of a Category B felony. Additionally, any person who knowingly conveys to a patient false information or information the person reasonably should have known was false, which relates to assisted reproduction, is guilty of a Category C felony. The bill also provides for a civil cause of action by a victim of fertility fraud and adds fertility fraud to a list of sexual offenses for which a perpetrator must register. The bill makes other statutory provisions governing sex offenders applicable to a person who commits the crime of fertility fraud. And finally, the bill provides that a healthcare facility shall not provide a patient with human reproductive material except in accordance with a written agreement between all concerned parties, and provides penalties for violating these provisions, including civil penalties and suspension or revocation of a facility's license. What we are trying to do with this bill is to ensure that if you are seeking fertility treatments, which can be very expensive, very time-consuming, and emotional for so many families and patients, that what you are consenting to is the treatment that you are actually receiving. And anyone who takes advantage of that situation should be held accountable and should have repercussions as a result. And so I would urge my colleagues' support for this bill.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21. The nays are 0. SB 309 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 316, introduced by Senators Scheibel, Spearman, Harris, Wynn, and Orenshaw, makes various changes relating to criminal law. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, end of bill.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 316 adds the name of a defendant and the associated case number to the annual report that district attorneys in each county must submit concerning cases that include a charge of murder or voluntary manslaughter, and transfers the responsibilities of receiving those reports from the Attorney General to the Department of Sentencing Policy.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21. The nays 0. SB 316 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 317, introduced by Senators Scheibel, et cetera, establishes provisions relating to resources for persons experiencing homelessness. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and to Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 9, end of subsection 2, end of bill.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 317 authorizes a provider of homeless services to allow a person experiencing homelessness to use the provider's address as a temporary mailing address for up to 180 days if the person is a Nevada resident receiving services from the provider. The address may be used for various purposes, including applying for public assistance, enrolling in the Nevada system of higher education, enrolling a family member in school, obtaining housing, or seeking or retaining employment.
Thank you. Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 317 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 340, introduced by Senators Dondero, Loop, etc., revises provisions relating to education. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 4, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval and expires by limitation on December 31st, 2024. End of bill.
Senator Dondero, Loop.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 340 authorizes the Board of Trustees of each school district and the State Public School Charter Authority to use available resources to provide summer school and require these entities to submit a plan to provide in-person or virtual summer school to pupils in pre-kindergarten through grade 12 during the 23 and 24 calendar years. The Board of Trustees of a school district and the governing body of a charter school must also provide transportation and meal services for these pupils. The bill outlines requirements relating to the hiring and payment of summer school personnel. Additionally, Senate Bill 340 requires school districts and the State Public Charter School Authority to submit a report relating to the plan to provide summer school to the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The superintendent must submit a compilation of these reports to various governmental entities, including the legislature. This bill is effective upon passage and approval and expires by limitation on December 31st, 2024.
Are there any further remarks from the floor? Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill requires districts and public charter schools to implement summer school, which Clark County School District is already implementing summer school. In the event that this bill is enacted into law sometime in May or June, that would mean that school districts and the public charter schools would submit a plan for summer school for the 2023 summer during or after most summer school programming has already started or even ended. In the event that this bill is not signed into law until after the legislative session, like most bills, generally, all summer school programming for the 2023 summer will have already been completed, not very well thought out. Also, requiring transportation and breakfast or lunch, which public charter schools get zero funding for. This bill would require charter schools to provide transportation and free breakfast attending summer school. While almost all charter schools provide free breakfast and lunch during the school year, a few do not. The reason for this is that these charter schools are very small and typically do not have kitchen facilities because essentially they get zero facility funding. In regard to transportation, even if charter schools were to be provided with transportation funding, which currently they are not, there was no fiscal note attached to this to request for transportation funding or help with facility funding. It would be impossible for charter schools to stand up transportation for the 2023 summer. Also, limitation on staffing. This bill would require all school districts and charter schools to employ only staff for summer school programming that are already contracted with and work at the school district or charter school. School districts and charter schools frequently employ staff for summer school programs that do not work at the school district or charter school during the year. We are in an epidemic of teacher shortage and burnout. We already have 1,283 teacher shortage for Clark County School District. Again, not very well thought out to mandate summer school with current employees and not even being flexible with having staff, parents, and various other ways to staff these programs. Also, it was mentioned in the hearing that there's $15 million from last session, which is currently being dispersed to serving disadvantaged charter school students for the regular school year to charter schools. So again, this is an unfunded mandate. It's already going to be happening in a lot of our larger school districts with the necessary food, but to mandate that with no funding for public charter schools is really something that should not happen. And also, the last 2 summers that my colleague introduced this bill, student achievement results actually showed that they declined. So again, leave it optional so that districts and public charter schools can decide to do this, can buy in to do this, as opposed to mandate things that don't necessarily lead to student achievement results. And so with that, I rise in opposition, and I hope that my colleagues do also.
Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would just like to point out to this body that my colleague is correct. There is $15 million for learning loss in the charter school account. And also that last time we had this particular bill, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and somehow many schools were very, very successful in this. I use my own grandchildren as an example who begged me to have summer school because that's how much they enjoyed it. And we are absolutely in an epidemic of children with learning loss. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to do what we can do to help our children be in school and do what we can do. And I would also put out a reminder that we have a funding formula, that the money follows the schools and the children. And so we need to remember that that money is for educating kids and doing everything we can to help these kids. I guess the other thing that I would leave you with is asking for your support, because all of our kids deserve what we can do best.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to add a little bit to the conversation. So there was $15 million set aside during the last session, and we have all kinds of buckets of funds. And this bucket of funds was specifically for charter schools for facilities. It wasn't for learning loss. And I think we all agree we need to make sure that our students have the education that they need, and we've had all these federal dollars to help us with that. So it's really important to be able to use those funds. But I do know that the $15 million was specific to facilities. And then when we talk about transportation, charters have never gotten any money for transportation. And if you just look at the amount of money that's funded per student for public charter schools, again, public charter schools, it is significantly lower than regular public schools. And so they're truly at a disadvantage when you add the requirement of transportation. And so I agree with my colleague who talked about making it optional, especially with the short timeline. And I think we need to be able to sort out the money. And something that may help this situation is if we were to allocate some money for transportation specifically for summer, if nothing else, if this bill passes. But again, I just want to make sure the record was set. We have all sorts of different buckets of money, and so it's hard to keep track of them sometime, but we did have some for facilities that actually has never been distributed, just another note. So it was approved back in 2021, and we've never been able to distribute those funds as was passed during the 2021 session. Thank you.
Any further remarks from the floor? Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much. And I would just remind my colleagues that the $15 million was earmarked for learning loss, and that is on a public document. So thank you very much.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close The roll, the ayes are 13, the nays are 8. SB 340 has received a constitutional majority and is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 368, introduced by Senators Harris, et cetera, revises provisions relating to real property of the people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows, Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 368 revises provisions governing how a property owner may record a restrictive covenant modification form concerning void and unenforceable language in any written instrument related to real property, which includes restrictions or prohibitions based on discriminatory factors, including but not limited to race, gender, color, disability, and religion. This bill removes provisions relating to the filing of a declaration of removal and instead provides that upon determining that a restriction or prohibition is void and unenforceable, a district court may issue an order directing the county recorder to record a restrictive covenant modification form. The real estate division and county recorders are required to develop the form in consultation and make it available free of charge. The original written instrument, this is an important part, the original written instrument will be maintained for historical purposes. The filing of a petition for a restrictive covenant modification form does not constitute grounds to delay any probate proceeding, divorce proceeding, or bankruptcy proceeding to which the property owner is a party. Bill is effective on October 1, 2023. And for my colleagues that are unfamiliar, this bill is aimed at removing some of these restrictions that you find in your CCNRs that limit the type of person who can live in a particular community or who you can sell your home to based upon race, gender, religion, or a number of other factors. And while they are currently unenforceable and unconstitutional, we have homeowners today in 2023 buying homes, signing away that they agree to the CCNRs, and this bill is aimed at getting that language out while also ensuring that the history remains alive. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The ayes are 21, the nays are 0. SB 368 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 378, introduced by Senator Cannizzaro, revises provisions relating to common interest communities, the people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 6, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval, end of bill.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 378 revises provisions concerning which documents a common interest community association with 150 or more units must make available on its website and removes a requirement that they must make it possible for a unit owner to pay assessments electronically. It provides instead that an association may allow payments to be made electronically if certain conditions are met, and eliminates provisions requiring that certain notices be delivered by mail, and providing instead that they can be sent via email in most circumstances, and prescribing how notices must be delivered when email is not to be used. Finally, the bill authorizes an association to purchase a unit at foreclosure sale by a credit bid up to the amount of any unpaid assessments and any permitted costs, fees, and expenses incident to the enforcement of the association's lien. And this bill is effective on passage and approval.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 378 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 381, introduced by Senators Harris, et cetera, prohibits a landlord from requiring a tenant to pay certain charges. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows, Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, end of bill.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 381 prohibits landlords from charging tenants for insurance or service contract deductibles or co-payments related to repairs, maintenance, or other work required to maintain the dwelling unit in a habitable condition. The bill does not allow landlords to charge for damages caused by a tenant's deliberate or negligent acts or those of a member of the tenant's household or of people on the premise with the tenant's consent. The bill is effective July 1, 2023.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I I stand in support of this bill, and I want to applaud the authors for bringing it forward. As a landlord, we have a duty to make sure that our units remain habitable for our tenants, and it would be inappropriate for us to charge them for regular management such as HVAC, backup of plumbing, etc. And so I believe that 98% of the landlords in the state are probably good people that maintain their units appropriately, but for those 2 or 3% that don't, we need this law in the books to make sure that our tenants can live in a habitable structure and not be charged for that habitability. So I applaud the authors and thank you for bringing it forward. Proud to support it today. I encourage everybody to vote for yes.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 381 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 382, introduced by Judiciary, revises provisions relating to juveniles. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 3, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, end of bill.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 382 eliminates the requirement for a district court to appoint counsel for a child who is the adverse party in an action against whom an order for protection is sought. It also provides that an admission, representation, or statement made during such proceeding is not admissible in any criminal or delinquency proceeding. And I'd just like to provide some background on this bill to make sure that all of my colleagues understand the purpose of it and the effect of it. The purpose of this bill is to ensure that when two juveniles are involved in a dispute and one of them is seeking a temporary protection order against the other one, that there is an even playing field. And so both sides are welcome to bring attorneys to a hearing for a protective order, but neither party is going to be provided with a free attorney for a hearing on a protective order. And by the same token, anything that they say in that proceeding regarding the protective order cannot later be used in a criminal proceeding. Whether it's the victim who makes a statement or the alleged perpetrator who makes a statement, anything they say in that proceeding will not be able to be introduced at a criminal trial to discredit either of them or to prove that either of them is, more trustworthy than the other. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote in support of SB 382 to ensure that people, especially young people, especially victims and survivors of sexual assault and related crimes, have an even playing field when they go to court, and that we can really provide trauma-informed care to them and trauma-informed judges who oversee these proceedings in a fair and impartial manner.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 382 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 397, introduced by Senator Cannizzaro, revises provisions relating to subsurface installations. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, end of bill.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 397 revises the definition of operator to exclude an interstate railroad company that operates more than 1,000 miles of railroad track if the subsurface installations owned, operated, or maintained by the company are located within the right-of-way of the company and are not subject to certain federal regulations governing pipeline safety.
Are there any remarks? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. 21 yeses, 0 nays. SB 397 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 401, introduced by Senator Flores, revises provisions relating to punitive damages. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 3, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023, end of bill.
Senator Flores.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 401 removes a requirement that for punitive damage to be awarded in a certain civil action involving operating a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol or another substance, the operator of the motor vehicle had to know prior to driving that he or she would thereafter operate the motor vehicle.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary open the roll. Does anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 401 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 442, introduced by Senator Dondero Loop, enacts the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments to the bill?
There are none. Section 6, end of subsection 2, end of bill.
Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 442 enacts the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, which establishes requirements for the issuance of a teacher license to an applicant who holds an equivalent license from another state that is also a member of the compact, and the sharing of files and information regarding the investigation and discipline of a teacher between member states. The bill requires the Commission on Professional Standards in Education to adopt regulations to carry out the provisions contained in the compact and provide the licensure pursuant to the compact. Additionally, Senate Bill 442 exempts a person who obtains a license pursuant to the compact from the examination required for the initial licensing of teachers and other educational personnel. This bill also exempts a person who applies for a license under this compact from submitting proof with the application that he or she has completed an approved course of study or training. This bill is effective upon passage and approval for purposes of adopting regulations and performing any preliminary administrative tasks on January 1st, 2024. And I would just like to add, Mr. President, that the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact becomes effective upon ratification from 10 states. And as of April 16th, 2023, Colorado, Kentucky, and Utah have enacted legislation, and another 16 states, including Nevada, have pending legislation. Thank you.
Remarks from the floor. Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would urge my colleagues to support this because this effectively helps a lot of members of active duty, not just active duty, but we have several members in our National Guard, and it is almost impossible to live when you're transferred from state to state, almost impossible for military families to live on one salary alone. So I urge your passage.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. 21 yeses, 0 nays. SB 442 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
That concludes Order of Business 13 and the business of the desk for the first agenda.
Okay, Order of Business 16, remarks from the floor, introduction of guests. Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to make a correction about some of the money that we just talked about because I was able to figure some more information out, and I appreciate the chair of finance pointing out that the $15 million was in a bucket for learning loss. That is completely accurate, and I want to make sure that I put that on the record. That was for learning loss. There is a separate $15 million bucket. I talked about we have all these different buckets that's in the infrastructure bank, and that $15 million is supposed to be matched by $100 million with a partnership, through a partnership with Opportunity 180. So I apologize for the confusion, and I appreciate the Chair of Finance pointing out that the $15 million that was mentioned is for learning loss for charter schools. Thank you, and that there's also another $15 million sitting in the infrastructure bank that is for facilities for charter schools. Thank you.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate this body passing out 2 bills regarding compacts. We passed out earlier a massage therapist compact, and now we just passed a teacher's compact, because these are critical need areas in our state, and recognizing that we need to be welcoming to these professions. I want to express my frustration that the nurse compact bill did not pass out of the House on the opposite side of this building. And I would urge this body to recognize that one of the main solutions, as was just stated by my colleague here to the left regarding mobile military folks with licensures, that we need to welcome all these compacts. So in the future, let's get together and perhaps we can get that nursing compact passed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to let my colleagues know on Senate Education that we will be canceled today.
Thank you. Senator Scheibel.
Can you come back to me in a minute?
I can. Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you, President. Some sad news this week. We lost former Assemblyman, former Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, Dr. Paul Aisley. He was a mathematician. I first met him at UNLV. When I was an undergrad, he was a director of summer programs, and he was trying to help me graduate and not drop out, and he was wonderful back then, and I never thought I'd serve with him in the state legislature. As a state legislator, he was a pioneer in the area of equality for the transgender community. He sponsored a bill in 2009 that would have prohibited discrimination for the transgender community. It was referred to committee, never got a hearing. He tried again in 2011. That bill was passed into law, and it was the first statute in Nevada, I believe, to prohibit discrimination against the transgender community. He tried to champion a lot of causes that weren't popular and didn't have a lot of other folks who would try to champion those causes, and he tried his best sponsoring legislation requiring labeling for food that contained GMOs, genetically modified organisms. That didn't pass, but he fought hard for that one. He fought hard incentives for the motion picture industry. Very devoted to UNLV. If you ever saw his car, he had the personalized license plate UNLV that he drove around in, and just somebody who cared a lot about the state, and we lost him this week.
Thank you. Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President, both for calling on me and for coming back to me. I wanted to let the Senate Judiciary Committee know that we will be meeting today. We will be moving AB 35 to a later date, but we do have out-of-town guests here to testify on AB 121, and I want to respect their time and make the effort to get together and hear that bill. The time is still TBD, so please stay tuned, and if you can please make yourselves available for a judiciary meeting just to hear one bill. I know our presenters would be grateful, as would I.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, that's the end of Order of Business 16 and our first agenda. We're going to take a 5-minute recess and then go to our second agenda. Do we have enough people? Okay. All right, the Senate is back in order. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that the Senate stand in a recess until the call of the chair.
Very good. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are in recess.